Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this open lunchtime briefing on the new Human Development Report, copies of which you have in front of the door. Thank you very much for this wonderful collaboration with UNDP. Thank you very much also for all of your time to be here today. And in good fashion, because we need some visuals, we'll start this discussion here today with a short video, and then we get into the grits and the meat of the 300+ page report. Please, video, go.
The human development path has shifted downwards, and these losses may be permanent, with the weakest countries being left behind after decades of catching up. Our inability to manage shared global challenges like climate change and pandemics not only threatens our well-being, but also sows division, fear, and conflict around the world. No country alone can tackle challenges that spill across borders, whether a virus or a warming planet. And yet, we're stuck in gridlock, with paralysing polarisation spreading everywhere. We cannot break this gridlock by turning inwards. We need to reimagine how we cooperate. We can start by building an institutional architecture that enhances the provision of global public goods, helping us to see the world as more than a zero-sum game and to come together on issues where it truly matters. We can help ease polarisation by fighting misperceptions that keep us apart, and by giving people the means to feel more in control of their lives. We don't have to be swept up in a whirlwind of problems, sinking deeper with each disaster. We must do better. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, and to the planet.
Thank you so much. And here you have already a first introduction to some of the main points which are coming out of this year's Human Development Report. And we have no one else than the director of the Human Development Report Office who is here, Pedro Conceição, who will walk us through the report and make a presentation right now, before we have, in fact, a panel discussion and then also a Q&A with all of you. Pedro, 300 pages. Walk us through the gist of it, please. Welcome very much to Geneva, and thank you for making time to being here with us.
Thank you, Achim. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The good news is that if you haven't had the report, after listening to me, you don't have to read it anymore, because I'll say everything that's important. So what is the Human Development Report? Many of you may know. The way I look at it is an invitation, really, for all of us to take a look in the mirror and assess how are we doing? How is the world doing? How is it progressing? And we do it from a unique angle, a unique perspective, a unique lens. That's the human development lens. That's the very simple idea that people should be able to live lives to their full potential and achieve everything they aspire to in their lives. Along with this idea, which is what matters the most, we also come up with some numbers, some metrics to try to give us a sense of whether we are moving in that direction or not. Perhaps the one that is most well known is the Human Development Index. So I'll start by giving you a sense of looking at human development through the Human Development Index perspective tells us about how well the world is doing. So what you see on the screen is the evolution of the global Human Development Index on average. And if actually you went back to 1990, what you would see is a straight line going up to 2019. Then in 2019, for the first time ever, the global Human Development Index declined 2 years in a row, 2020, 2021. Good news is that the Human Development Index is now moving back up, and is expected in 2023 to actually reach the highest level on record, not only as a whole, but on each of its components on gross national income per capita that measures standards of living, on life expectancy at birth that measures achievements in health, and on the education indicators as well. So it's a good news story, but there are things that are concerning. First is that this path of improvement in the Human Development Index is below the path that one would have expected had we not suffered the decline. So that's what's represented by that shaded area there a little bit. Now, if the trend continues like that, basically it has shifted downward, and if it continues in a parallel way below the potential trend, this represents losses in human development, losses in human potential that can be very long-lasting, potentially permanent, if we are not able to move the trend of improvement upwards. And the second element that is very concerning has to do with the fact that those that are the poorest and most vulnerable of our international community are being left behind. So what you see on this screen is the difference in the level of the Human Development Index between countries at the very top and countries at the very bottom of the Human Development Index. So it's a line that has trended downwards for many decades, actually. So the difference has reduced, meaning that the difference between countries at the top of the Human Development Index and those at the bottom has shrunk. But over the last 40 years, so this is started when the Global Human Development Index declined, you see the red part of the line that there's been a reversal. And the line is now moving upwards, meaning that we are seeing a divergence between countries at the very top of the Human Development Index and at the bottom of the Human Development Index. And this is something that we see not only across countries, but that we see also within countries. In Europe, for instance, we know that up to a third of the European population lives in regions that suffer also a phenomenon of being left behind. So if we take the 2030 Agenda pledge to leave no one behind, we are falling short. Because the pledge was not only to leave no one behind, was to reach the furthest behind first. So we should have worried about the countries at the very bottom of the Human Development Index, because remember, it's not only that the gap is increasing, their levels were already very low. And so we should be concerned with this reversal of a project of convergence that characterized the evolution of human development that is now leading to a process of actually divergence. And in addition to the objective metrics that we use to characterize human development, the fact that something is not going well is reflected also in things like people reporting feeling stressed. And on this chart, you see the number of countries in which stress, people saying that they feel stressed, meaning that the life is throwing at them more than they think they can handle, has been increasing in many countries at all levels of the Human Development Index. So the question is, why are we in this situation? What's going on? The analysis in the report suggests that an answer, a reason, not the only reason, but a reason, an important reason, is the fact that we are not doing a good job at managing interdependencies. So this was put in sharp relief during the context of COVID-19. It's an ongoing challenge when it comes to climate change. It's an ongoing challenge when it comes to conflict, to geopolitical upheaval, geoeconomic fragmentation. So the management of interdependencies is one of the drivers of this divergence, of stress, and the declines and the downward shift in the trend of human development. Because the argument is that assume a country is doing everything right on its own. Say a country was doing everything right before 2019. Then it was hit by these shocks, and all countries were hit by these shocks. The decline in Human Development Index happened in 90% of the countries that are related not so much of potentially policy mistakes that a country individually has done, but by things that had to do with the way in which we manage the fact that we have many interdependencies across countries. Going further, why are we not managing well these interdependencies? The report argues that a lot has to do with a context of political polarization. Political polarization is not just people having differences of views or opinions. It's about segments of society becoming so far apart that they turn into belligerent camps. And this poisons collective action, poisons collaboration, poisons cooperation, both within and across countries. Now, what to do about it? Because the report is not only about the diagnostic, it suggests also some ways forward. So one of the, I'll mention three briefly, and then I'll conclude so that we can go to the discussion. One has to do with trying to understand some of the underlying drivers of this polarization and the way in which it manifested also in some other aspects that hurt our ability to cooperate. So a big driver has to do, in our view, with perceptions of insecurity. People that feel insecure tend to trust others less. People that feel insecure tend to be attracted to the extremes of the political spectrum, both on the left and on the right. People that feel insecure tend to feel less in control of their lives. This is what you see on the screen. As you move from the left to the right, you see a representation of people that have low perceptions of insecurity to people that have very high perceptions of insecurity. And you see that the line trends upward, and what we see on the horizontal axis is people reporting feeling not in control of their lives. So this relates to a very important idea in human development that, in addition to a broader understanding of well-being that goes beyond GDP, has to do with the notion of agency. Amartya Sen, who is one of the people that inspired the human development approach, used to say that people should be seen not as patients, but as agents, able to shape their lives and their destiny. So this shows that people that feel more insecure tend to see themselves as agents, less as agents than people that have low levels of insecurity. One of the manifestations of this is reflected in what we call a democracy paradox, a frustration with the political system. 2/3 of the global population today does not feel that their voice is heard in their political system. And it's reflected also in what we call a democracy paradox. So if you ask people around the world if they like democracy, believe in democracy, would like to live in a democracy, which is what you see the percentage on the horizontal axis, up to 90% of the population says yes, and they've consistently saying yes since the turn of the century, essentially, since we have data. But at the same time, if you ask whether people would support leaders that may undermine democracy, that percentage has also been going up. That's why the line is sort of moving upwards, because that's what you see on the vertical axis. And this increase has led to the fact that today, more than half of the global population would support such leaders. So people feeling insecure, people feeling frustrated with the political system, are attracted to the political spectrum, to the extremes of the political spectrum, trust others less. And it's not that they don't believe in the ideal of democracy, it's that they feel that they are not being heard and would tend to support leaders that may actually undermine democracy. Second thing that can be done is to recognize that we often agree on more than we think. So I'll just give an example, but there are many others in the report. The example is about what people respond to the question of whether they would be willing to make a personal financial sacrifice to mitigate climate change. So it's personal financial sacrifice. So it's not whether they believe that climate change is true or not. They actually would be willing to put some money, their own money, into mitigating climate change. Almost 70% of the global population say yes to this. And then you ask, do you think that people around you sharing the same belief? That percentage then drops to 43, a little above 40%. Why is this important? Some of the challenges that we confront, climate change is an example, cannot be addressed on the basis of personal commitment alone. No matter how each of us individually is to challenges such as climate change, they require collective action. Collective action implies not only individual, but knowing or being confident that those around you share the same beliefs that you do. So correcting these misperceptions would be one way, narrowing this misperception gap would be one way potentially of easing polarization, because climate change is one of the issues that is polarizing many of our societies. Not so much between climate deniers and those that believe in the climate change, there are climate deniers, but more between those that think that we're doing too much and those that think that we are not doing enough. This is one of the cleavages that we see in many of our societies, and yet we actually agree on more than we think we do. Finally, and I'll stop, Achim, moving a little bit more into the international context. We argue and suggest that it's important for countries to find ways of cooperating and finding arenas of cooperation. One way of doing this is by using a lens of identifying what could these arenas of cooperation be. That is the lens of global public goods. What are global public goods? Global public goods are things that are in everyone's interest, and the fact that one country benefits from it doesn't preclude others from doing the same. So climate change mitigation is an example. Pandemic control is another example. Sometimes the discussion on global public goods is seen as something that is antagonistic or substitute to an agenda that is focused on reducing inequalities. But what the graph that you see on the screen shows is that if we fail to mitigate climate change, actually inequalities will increase. So the graph shows the evolution of deaths, so mortality rates in different regions of the world, defined by the Human Development Index. So countries with very high levels of Human Development Index would actually see a small decline in mortality rates. But countries with low, medium, and high levels of Human Development Index will actually see an increase in these mortality rates. And the highest increase will be for those that have the least. So remember, I come back to how we started with a pattern of divergence that was happening in a very short time horizon, 4 years. The last 4 years, we see this pattern of divergence. This graph shows what's likely to unfold over a much longer horizon if we continue to fail to address interdependencies. So this is not to suggest that countries will not have their differences. Countries will have their disputes. They will compete fiercely, economically, on technology. They'll have their disputes. That's not going to go away. It's a fact of life. But that's not incompatible with the notion that countries can still find arenas in which they can come together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro. Why don't you just stay up, and you can take the first chair here. May I invite our speakers to come, or speakers or commentators to come in front? Please just pick your chair. Look, fascinating, Pedro, and also don't forget, behind these graphs and numbers there are faces of people. There are regions, there are entire cities that might be wiped out, or parts of cities, which is part of the picture. So it's behind the cold nature of the number and the data are real images and are real people. And so don't forget that human dimension of what is in fact some of the key messages coming out of this year's Human Development Report. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to get us into the discussion mode, we have a fantastic roundup of commentators who will share reflections on their reading. I'm very pleased to welcome Jessica Abrovitz, who's featured as a student discussant, but also involved in the Young Diplomats Initiative here at the Geneva Graduate Institute that collects a lot of the young energy that will be in senior positions in the decades to come. So a lot of your professional agenda is right in this report. I'm also very pleased to welcome Mia Seppo, who is the Assistant Director General for Jobs and Social Protection at the International Labour Organization. Welcome to the Graduate Institute. We have also with us Karen Jabri, who is Director of the Division of Programs of the Interparliamentary Union. And then last but surely not least, Vahini Naidu, the Trade Development from the Trade for Development Program of the South Center. Welcome, welcome. Now, since we're at the university, we want to hear, Jessica, we want to hear you first. What do you make of the report? What are your, on what lines of reflections would you start off the conversation?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, so I'm here on behalf of the Junior Diplomats Initiative, which in April just got done with our youth dialogue, which is primarily focused on making sure that we're engaging the youth on the future of these issues. And that was sort of the theme of that forum, was making sure that we are really thinking about the future of a number of these issues, including technology, sort of at the forefront. So just to start off, I wanted to note the issue of polarization. There's a huge intergenerational divide between sort of the folks who are tapped in and grew up with these technologies and see them sort of as key points of social media engagement on issues that they care about. And it also sort of older generations who are learning these technologies for the first time, seeing them as positive developments and really important entry points for future policy development. But that there's kind of a distrust in the youth to be able to use these technologies for good. And so one of the things that I just really wanted to note, sort of first and foremost, was that the youth engage with technology as a point of information to hold their leaders accountable. And ultimately, there's this issue of older generations seeing elites as their sounding board, trusting that elites have sort of the important messages for them of the day, and youth being surrounded in this information sphere and feeling that elites are ultimately tone deaf to a lot of the issues that they see because they are able to engage with that information directly. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of one of the main points that I wanted to hit.
Okay. Can I just do one thing? Who has kids who are in the age of 10 and 25? Can I just ask you how many discussions you have with them on a daily basis on the use of the mobile phone? 1, 2, 3? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Just to your point. Just a little bit of a crowd sensitization. So the polarization is right in our household, and I can testify to this with a 13-year-old. Now, you spoke on polarization. Let's keep on. I mean, we have pulled out 4 major themes which we wanted to discuss. Polarization is one. Feel free to speak on this, Mia, or also on the implications for the Global South, on social justice, and of course on ultimately, we are in Geneva, what it all means for us being in this town of global cooperation.
Super, thank you. Well, let me start by congratulating Pedro and team for having produced an incredibly long and complex report. I expected no less, and most of your questions are going to go to Pedro. I actually want to start with a quote, because I was really taken by some of the content of the report and how far-reaching implications it has if really taken into account in what we do as a multilateral system and as human beings. So, now my phone froze. So the quote is, it was so much easier to blame it on them. It was bleakly depressing to think that they were us. It was, if it was them, then nothing was anyone's fault. If it was us, what would that make me? After all, I was one of us. I must be. I've certainly never thought of myself as one of them. No one ever thinks of themselves as one of them. We're always one of us. It is them who do the bad things. So, I want to pick up on this issue of narrowing the gap, the agency gap, and highlight 3 issues which is really important for ILO, and that's social protection, skills, and social dialogue. So social protection we see as a really empowering tool. It's not just about social safety nets, it's actually about empowerment. It is about narrowing that gap. And I think the Brazilian Bolsa Familia program is a really good example of an intervention that actually brought down the sense of inequality and increased inclusion. At ILO, we do not look at social protection in a silo. We look at it as part of an integrated approach, creating jobs that ensure access to social protection and looking at that in a context of rapidly changing labor markets. Skills is another absolutely critical aspect of narrowing the gap, and that is both digital and green skills, reskilling, upskilling, but it's importantly about inclusive access to skills. And that goes a bit to your point in terms of who actually gets these new skills that are clearly going to be the ones in the demand on the global and the changing labor market. And these skills is the enabler of transitions. It makes sure that workers don't feel so insecure, and it enables them to find their place in transitioning, green transitions, digital transitions, as well as the demographic transitions. And the last point, of course, from our side is just to emphasize that labor rights are human rights. And this is a very key issue to really take to heart in terms of narrowing that sense of not having agency. So freedom of association, which you address in the report, is a core labor right. It allows for workers, employers, and governments to get together, to have their voices heard, and to find common ground. This social dialogue is democracy in action. It's democracy at the workplace, and it can, when successfully done, bring down that level of sense of not having agency at the workplace. And at the end of the day, I think most of us will actually make a living through going to work every day. And that's why this is so important in terms of how we feel, in terms of both belonging as well as security. So I just wanted, as the last point, to say we obviously have a big body of international labor standards. These are the guardrails for making sure that we decrease the exploitative nature of work. You might have seen ILO's latest report on forced labor, a continued problem, child labor, a continued problem, new challenges in terms of the platform economy, the gig economy, but this is what ILO does through tripartite processes, finding the guardrails for this new changing reality in the world of work. And a recent example is the discussions on living wage, which is absolutely critical for fairness in the workplace. I just want to finish by picking up on your point, Jess. It's really important that we start to think about what an intergenerational workplace is going to look like. And that's not just because the skills are going to be different, it's also because of the demographic transitions and the challenges that poses. In parts of the world, old people will be expected to retire later. In other parts of the world, you have the youth who are going to be the solution if provided with the skills that they need. But these intergenerational workplaces is something that we really have to figure out and make sure that that's a place where everybody feels agency and everybody feels secure.
Thank you so much. And it will have to do something about thinking about hierarchies. And that's all these models of more hierarchically organized organizations. That's, of course, extremely important in this. You mentioned the dialogue, but the tripartite system. That's already great for the bucket list for you to take home. The ILO's history on the tripartite dialogue also as an instrument to on the how of dealing with the report. But then we have also parliaments that have something to do with dialogue. dialogue. If there are some space for division and polarization, much of this happens in parliaments today. So what did you make of the approach? What's your contribution to the how? How do we get beyond the polarization and activity on climate change and so much more?
Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, I think parliaments have certainly a part of the problem and the solution as well. But first, let me say as well, congratulations for a very insightful and thought-provocative report. And coming from the IPU, we regroup 180 national parliaments from around the world. And it is such reports that I think make a difference in parliaments with the Human Development Index as well. And I think we really look forward to disseminating it in parliaments so that there can be a discussion as well there on those topics. I also want to say that for the IPU, the question of polarization has already been and is constantly on the agenda of MPs. When they meet, it's a regular concern, and the disconnect between parliaments and the population is something that is constantly a priority for parliamentarians to address. And back in 2021, we already adopted a Madrid Declaration, which is on overcoming division and building community in order to address major challenges to democracy. So I think for us at the IPU, we see the solution in parliaments as well to the challenge of polarization. And for us, it is about building trust and hope through parliaments. And we have developed this concept of democratic parliaments. We developed it with UNDP and other stakeholders, which is about building institutions that are effective, transparent, accountable, representative, and accessible. This is the way that we would like to see parliaments evolve and develop. And for that, I think there are three things that we need to invest in today, which will contribute to weakening the challenge of polarization today. First, I think we need to defend those governance institutions, such as parliaments around the world today. They are facing numerous challenges, whether constitutional, lack of constitutional respect, due process, lack of respect for the rule of law, but also even challenges in terms of security of parliaments. We have seen coups happening. We have seen threats against MPs themselves, women MPs in particular. And this is a trend that is extremely worrying, because if MPs don't feel safe, they will not be able to carry out their mandates. So safeguarding governance institutions such as parliaments is certainly one key priority, because we need to preserve that space, because parliaments is a space for dialogue, and it should be a space for dialogue. And that's what we need to anchor and strengthen to address polarization. And this in two ways for us, both first to enhance the representation in parliaments. Today, only 27% of MPs around the world are women. Less than 4% of MPs around the world are less than 30 years old. Only less than 20% are below 40. So we have a major discrepancy. And I can't, we can go on in terms of minority representation, etc. So representation is one issue. The question of engagement with citizens is another one. And building inclusive decision-making processes is something that is really a major challenge, but also a priority. And we've seen parliaments today develop new mechanisms, new approaches or platforms to engage citizens, such as, citizens' assemblies, you have petitions, you have consultations, you have bringing in MPs and citizens talking together within Parliament, etc. And I think this is the way forward to build trust and see and give the message that citizens are heard and that their priorities are acted upon. And so there are many initiatives, but I won't go into them. The last point I want to say is in order for parliaments to do this, we need to also support their capacity. And capacity means not only human resources and funding, it's also capacity to anchor new technologies. Things go so fast, and they need to be able to respond to this pace of change. It's also anchoring evidence in parliaments. That's key to building trust as well. And it is about finding new partnerships, working with researchers, working with scientific community, building the internal capacity of parliaments to really anchor evidence-based decision-making in parliaments.
Thank you so much. And at least in the peace world, there is, of course, fantastic research about parliaments as an ultimate peace facilitation instrument. No, where the left pulls the right back from its extremes, vice versa. No, so that you have always pulling factors that pull the extremes back a little bit more back to the center. And
that is healthy. That's
healthy. No, and that's where even though parliaments have such a long and sometimes a little bit ossified appearance, they're still extremely relevant today. And rejuvenating that also with the younger parliamentarians is perhaps something for your suitcase in the how list to take back. No? We have one more commentator. Thank you very much for being here with us. Vahini, you are from the Global South Center. So all this, what you take out there from this discussion on the countries in the so-called Global South, what do you make of it in the Human Development Report?
Okay, thank you so much. I'll try to capture all my thoughts in 3 minutes. And congratulations on a fantastic report. I think the findings are quite illuminating, but also not surprising, because we're seeing a lot of these kinds of inequalities being represented across a number of outcomes and in terms of implementation or lack of implementation through rules or global rules. But I think two main points that I want to point out, in particular with, having some kind of inclusive approach in terms of dialogue, but also in terms of global public goods, is this notion of inclusive policy development. And so as the South Center, we are a think tank, an organization for the South, by the South. And increasingly, across a range of multilateral fora, we're seeing, of course, a very siloed approach to very, very pertinent issues. So, for example, in the World Trade Organization, the approach to climate change, the approach to trade and environment issues and environmental sustainability are very mercantilist in nature. And, the challenge is that it's also very siloed. And so I think it's really critical that there is a deeper reflection in terms of these global issues of cooperation in the international environment to bring back everybody to the global stage in an inclusive way, to have dialogue and to potentially develop some kind of multilateral cooperation framework. The notion of technology transfers is a reference that you cannot even mention in the WTO, without it being slammed. So I think those are kind of some important things. And, you mentioned the exploitation of people. And one interesting kind of dynamic that is now finally entering the WTO workstream is this notion of the exploitation of raw materials and critical minerals. African countries, for example, and LDCs, for example, the structural transformation of their economies is that they are primarily commodity dependent, exporting countries. And so to bring about the structural transformation, I think that more needs to be done in terms of industrial policy, but there's also a very big scope for the WTO to do something. And the challenge that we are seeing on a daily basis on the ground in these institutions is one, pretty much an intransigence. So you want to maintain the status quo. You don't really want to bring about legitimate or effective development through trade rules, through financial rules, through changing the financial and economic architecture, but also the so-called reform, is taking place in a very exclusive way in terms of retaining status quo, just advancing issues relating to market access, and not legitimately addressing development issues. So just for example, it's going to be very interesting next week because in the WTO, a paper is going to be introduced by the African group, for example, on industrial policy space for development, but the focus for the first time will be on critical raw materials and minerals in relation to the green transition. So this is really quite, innovative, and it's probably going to cause a lot of cause for reflection. But I think these are important discussions that we need to have. And maybe I should just close by saying that increasingly, Bretton Woods institutions are quite intransigent or inflexible to the notion of kind of changing voting rights, and the ability for countries to participate in decision-making processes. But this is also, unfortunately, entering the WTO, where proposals are being made to bring in the notion of responsible consensus. So basically, they talk about like win-win approaches. So the idea is that in addition to advancing my national interests for development, for bridging inequality, I must also put the system's interests at the forefront. And it's going to be quite interesting from a development perspective, because the WTO is celebrating or commemorating 30 years of its existence. And its commemoration went pretty unnoticed. And I think that is also a signal about the big questions around how global trade rules have really contributed to or informed major inclusive sustainable development in the global south. Thank you.
Excellent. And I'll add to the reflection, you mentioned the Bretton Woods. There's, of course, now a whole series of other global institutions out there, not just the New Development Bank, which reflects the Chinese projection and development in the world, but also all sorts of BRICS multilateralism. So these are new multilateral structures which also, of course, should be sensitized to the findings of this report. Not yet represented in Geneva, but at least there's now not just the Bretton Woods. There's more than that. No? We have a good 25 more minutes, and before we come back to all of you with reflections, I just wanted to feel the room, the temperature for questions and reflections. Here we go. Yeah, we have one question right here, one in the back. If we have one, of course, for our fellow friends with the microphones. So we start with you, and then we have you. Do we have one or two microphones? One? Okay, so you start here, and I go to the back.
Thank you, Richard Hill, civil society activist. I wonder if anybody on the panel would, I'm kind of building on what Vahini said, but going a bit further. Would anybody agree that the fundamental issue is that the rich North, which largely got rich by exploiting the rest of the world, is not really willing to share so that the rest of the world comes to the same level? And in fact, now it seems that we even want to prevent China from progressing any further than it already has. Do you think that's a fair analysis?
Let's collect some questions and observations. We go straight on here.
Thank you so much. My name is Randa Jamal. Actually, I started my career in UNDP, focusing on human development in the Arab region, and it was quite interesting to see this report today. So I saw that insecurity in the Arab states is highest, and I wonder if this is a response to what's happening globally with having, for example, so many universities and students in the north and the south, but not in the Arab states, actually react to what's happening in Gaza. And I have also another question, and thank you so much for this excellent report. Did this report account to what's happening in Gaza in terms of the loss of humans, the loss of human capital, doctors, UN staff, nurses, journalists, very young children? We're talking about thousands. 80% of the population in Gaza is actually mostly a refugee one that has been serviced by UNRWA, as we know. And I'm just wondering, what would be the plans for UNDP to really address this? And would you have to surrender to any, let's say, pressure, whether it has to do with funding or, the powerful north versus the south? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other question, comments? Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the presentation interventions. My name is Mauricio Acuña from Colombia. And I'm just wondering about the title, Reimagining Cooperation, because it's well known now that there are some prioritizations right now. Of course, we talk about climate change. Of course, we could talk about human development and so on. But is it really the topic that are we right now? Is it the one that is really focusing now in the international agenda, or there's something else? Because now that we are in this new war situation in so many places, conflicts all around, it seems like really hard to reimagine all these cooperation, which has a lot of topics around. There is, of course, security cooperation, of course, that we've seen all around nowadays more and more, but also, in terms of not only trade, but also in social development, in the products, in environment. I mean, there are a lot of topics in cooperation. So how do we reimagine if we're still in the war zone, in the war logic? That's my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there any other question, comment? Otherwise, Pedro, over to you. It's so nice to be the moderator.
I was off the hook. No, thank you for the very good comments and questions. So, Mauricio, starting perhaps with your question, I think your question is really the premise and the inspiration for the report, right? It's why do we seem so stuck and so much in gridlock, in fact, fighting each other, killing each other, at a time in which we need to cooperate more than ever? So that was the motivation for the report that led us to identify. Of course, there are many reasons and many specificities to many different challenges around the world, but underlying much of this, a common thread, if there's something that is sort of universal to what we are observing, because it's widely shared, is this perception of insecurity. Perception of insecurity that is widespread, and it takes different expression in different contexts. Sometimes it's more economic insecurity, so social protection is one of the elements that can help people that feel economic insecurity. Sometimes it's personal integrity insecurity. Sometimes it's violent conflict. People live in life violent conflict. But there's a pervasive sense of insecurity that then is linked to lack of trust in one another, and the declining trust in institutions as well. The two are actually correlated, as we find in the report, is linking to this polarization. So sometimes what we see in the international context when it comes to conflict or geopolitical upheaval or even geoeconomic fragmentation is a reflection of political polarization in countries. Sometimes that connection is not made. But the positions that countries take in the international context sometimes shift radically. And shift radically because many countries are polarized and they move from one side to the other very rapidly. Colombia is an example, but there are many others. I don't need to mention them. I think we all know. So the report tries to establish this link between the international and the domestic in a sense, and try to argue that the two are interrelated, and then going a little bit more into the solutions on what to do about it. A lot of it has to do what we do internally within our societies. So that's sort of the logic of the report, and I mentioned some of the things that we consider important doing. On the discussion, the question that was posed on Rich versus South, and clearly that is what not only we observe historically, but unfortunately what is unfolding before in front of our eyes, right? I mean, in the report we give a little anecdote of what happened during COVID-19 when South Africa provided the global public good, in fact, by telling the world that there was a new variant of the virus, the Omicron variant. Maybe you forgot about this, but at the time it was everything that dominated the news. So what did rich countries do? Anyone remembers?
They screwed South Africa.
They stopped flights going into South Africa. So it's an anecdote, but it is an illustration of the tensions that we see unfolding in many of the problems that were described in the WTO and other contexts. What the report, though, invites us to reflect upon is that there is a set of institutions and debates around globalization that are associated with how we manage essentially the flow of goods, services, capital, and people across the world. That's a very relevant debate. But the report invites us to think about the importance of considering the reality that we lived in a shared planet. And so in addition to the discussion around how do we manage trade, how do we manage finance, that we need to get right, and we aren't doing it, we need to consider that we cannot address climate change at the border. No country alone will ever be able to do it. So we introduced this notion of planetary public goods, which are a special category of global public goods that really require countries to come together. And despite all their differences, you see it happen to some extent. The US and China have very fierce dispute on many things, as we all know. And yet they are collaborating on when it comes to climate change. Digital transformation is another example. The United States introduced recently a resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations on artificial intelligence, seconded by China and approved. So there is the possibility, that's why I alluded to the fact that there are arenas of cooperation in which countries can see in their interest to manage these planetary public goods and digital public goods that are sort of a new frontier that is not only relevant today, but it's going to be even more relevant as we go into the future. That's why I concluded with a slide on what's likely to happen when it comes to the differences that we already see that are growing if we don't address these planetary public goods. On Gaza, the report does not include the data because it wasn't available when we were writing, but UNDP has already released 2 reports, actually, with simulations trying to estimate the human development cost and impact of the conflict in Gaza. So we released one right after the outbreak of the conflict, I believe, in November, if I'm not mistaken, and recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, a revised estimate giving an account of the cumulative effect of the long-lasting conflict and the dire implications for human development in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to land the discussion a bit in Geneva, because, of course, we are all here because we work on that part there, cooperation in one way or the other. So allow me to ask you, our panelists, just very briefly, how do you anchor what comes out of the report in the work of your organization? And how do you make what your organization does relevant to help Pedro sleep well and said, my report really had an impact? So how do you take the report inside your office and say, that's what we're going to do? And how do we ultimately then, in the bigger picture, how does this help ensure the relevance of a global cooperation hub like Geneva for the years ahead? Just briefly, please.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is, the dominant development practice, how the institutions work, how the UN works, how funding works, how investment works is very siloed. And I think one of the big takeaways from the report and how it describes complexities is we need, as UN in Geneva and as UN in general, to step out of the silos. We need to be able to work in integrated manners. We need to be able to do team work in a very different way. The UN needs very new leadership models and leadership models that are, it's not just about the intergenerational workplace, it's about a whole new way of looking at hierarchies. And that's going to take a lot of kind of changing in terms of just the natural instinct of the UN system. So I think that's one of the big things for me.
Can I just ask you, who's a silo buster as a profession? So we have a few silo busters, which is a real profession here in Geneva, and which is particularly in this policy space of the platforms which exist in Geneva. There's about 20 platforms which exist, and all of these platforms are professional silo busters. Between the diplomatic silo, between a lot of different professional silos which exist here, the private sector silo. So check this out if you are interested by silo busting. Start coming to the Graduate Institute. Yes, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make an intervention real fast on behalf of the youth, just because I think one of the themes of this report and agency really comes back to the conversation that we've been having about sort of being more inclusive. Gen Z is one of the most inclusive and open-minded generations to come yet. That's inclusive both towards each other and also just in terms of issues, and that comes back to this concept of silo busting. Really, we can't afford to address these issues within silos because they affect us all at once. climate change really is at the heart of a lot of these issues. And if you look at the youth movements around several different conflicts going around in the world right now, they have climate change at their heart, because that ultimately, our relationship to the planet, to nature, is what motivates us to be able to see an end to these conflicts, because there has to be a planet for us to live on at the end of the day, regardless of how many people are involved in that space. And so I really wanted to come back to this idea of the youth have to break down these barriers and have to be able to reach out to government, policymakers, decision makers, have to be able to communicate effectively, whether that's through technology in the future of the workplace, or whether that's through other movements which we've seen kind of flare up around the world, expressing that frustration and expressing the fact that the youth perspective feels like in itself it has been sort of siloed and kept aside from the way that the rest of the work that goes on in international Geneva and other places continues. And so I think that this is a reaction to seeing how we've been separated, seeing how the work continues in these sort of segmented fashions without sort of seeing it all as one and part and parcel of the same thing. And ultimately, you'll find that in the youth generations, strategic foresight is on the rise as a field that we all are very interested in, because it critically understands scenarios and sort of all of these issues as part of different worlds that we will have to deal with. And so being able to study that perspective at the Institute and other places is one of the reasons why we are so motivated to be able to take on these issues and to continue that sort of breaking down the barriers momentum.
And to give you a comment, just a little bit more emphasis still, what we observe in the student community is an absolute disenchantment with a lot of the UN system, partly because there's no way in, neither for jobs, neither for attending meetings, or, God bless, to attend the Palais des Nations. And many of our students just look for work elsewhere. So the UN is losing a lot of the brightest talents. And for a long-term trajectory for an organization, that's not good. So
come to HDRO.
We have a great alumni. We have a great careers office. I'll send them all to you. Please.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I certainly agree, and I'll certainly look up also silo busting. Really, but I think the IPU 3 years ago adopted a new strategy for parliaments, which is about parliaments in ecosystems, and it's about acknowledging that parliaments don't exist on their own, and they have a reality around them, and they have to work with all the different stakeholders that are out there. Youth, of course, is certainly one of the top priorities, but it is about breaking those silos as well, both at the national level, but for us at the IPU, it's also breaking those silos at the international level. We very much argue that it's important for parliaments to be able to be represented and to be part of the international negotiations that are ongoing and that are led mainly by government and do not allow for this diversity of views to be expressed, at least through the parliaments or through different other stakeholders. So that's certainly one thing that we will continue to look forward to and to support, because it's important to bring everyone on board, as you said.
Thank you. Vahini, please.
Thank you. So we, of course, believe as the South Center in strengthening multilateralism. But I think it's also important to point out, based on, the comments that were just made about rich and poor and, this orchestrated and coordinated agenda to ensure that developing countries do not climb the development ladder. And, this is, of course, motivated by trade tensions, subsidies, unilateral coercive measures, sanctions, punitive measures like the CBAM and all of that, and it's not making this cause easier. And so I think it's going to entrench imbalances, and so we, of course, would prefer to strengthen a more inclusive and multilateral approach. In terms of our institution, I think we also believe, and that's part of our core mandate in terms of capacitating developing countries, in terms of advancing their interests, formulating positions and proposals. And I really see an opportunity, from the report on the global public goods to kind of mainstream this discourse, but in a pragmatic way through proposals in the intellectual property and the trade spaces, for developing countries to advance this. And finally, just to say that as a priority or as an overarching perspective, economic growth and industrialization remain the cornerstone of sustainable development pathways for developing and least developed countries. And this is, of course, learning from how industrialized countries have become industrialized. And so reforming the rules, that would promote this kind of industrial development will be very critical in terms of our portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. Just remain seated for just a minute. We're not just ready yet. We have the possibility and the great honor to have Daniel Caveng with us, who is the senior diplomatic advisor at the State Secretariat at the Swiss Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But most of all, your daily work is about foresight and planning. So you are an avid reader of the Human Development Report.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I read the report, I became angry. Not because of the report, but because of the content, so the state of the world. Now, I'm a diplomat, and as a good teacher and friend of mine told me when I was a young diplomat, diplomats never get angry, they just take note. So today, I speak to you not as a diplomat, I speak to you undiplomatically, in a private capacity as a global citizen. I want to make 3 points. First, I think we need to become serious, and especially politically. For me, the report shows clearly that a global public order is terribly missing. Instead, we live, and we continue to live, in a mess of actors, states, international organizations, NGOs, companies, philanthropes, I don't know, many more. This might have worked in the past. The question is then how well it has worked, but it does not work in bad times. And I think we live in bad times. Second point, we need outcome orientation. The mess of actors is still input and output oriented. They are proud of how much they spend, their various activities, and of course, what is then reported as the output of their glorious activities. What is missing, and I know UNDP is a great advocate of that, is to orient everything towards outcomes. Outcomes matter. The rest, put it bluntly, just forget about it. Outcomes necessitate clear responsibility, and thus this orientation cannot, in my view, be achieved without addressing the first point, so to have a true public order at all levels. Third point, we need urgently focus. The mess of actors cannot mess around in all directions and taking no real responsibility for outcomes. The UNDP report clearly points out the urgency of action. There are so many negative feedback loops in action already. More pop up, I have the feeling. And it's more and more difficult to stop those negative loops, to revert them, and to switch to positive feedback loops. We therefore need to focus action on the most urgent and the most important interventions, those with the highest leverage in the system. So public order and responsibility also means setting quite fast the right priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, my conclusion from these 3 points, so effective public order, outcome orientation, and focus on the highest leverage interventions, is twofold. First, we need to think differently. What matters, really, and what creates mess? Without clear thinking, no clear action. Secondly, we need to act differently. Actions need to be guided by an authoritative order and effective decisions. Without new order, no or not fast enough desired outcomes. And who is better positioned to come up with solutions on these two fronts than I think the two institutions who brought us together today, here in Geneva, the Graduate Institute and UNDP. I think GDI, for me, providing the basis for this new thinking, and I work a bit with them on that, and UNDP for providing the basis for the action agenda. So now that's a lot of food for thought, and I added fuel for action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much to all of you. Breaking the gridlock, reimagining cooperation in a polarized world. I think in the closing remarks showed what this might mean and the pathway ahead that should bring us all together much more frequently on this. Not just in talk, but talking about action. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you to all the team. Thank you for the collaboration. Thank you to our commentators. Have a lovely afternoon.